3 ways feminists victim blame in relation to male suicide. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and as I mentioned in a recent video, I've known at least 7 male friends who have committed suicide. I don't really know the reasons for their suicides, and I don't want to get into it, but one thing I have noticed is this. While feminists will usually at least pretend to care about male suicide, they will almost unanimously end up blaming men and boys who commit suicide, attempt suicide, or have considered suicide. They usually basically blame these males for their suicidal thoughts. They victim blame the entirety of the male gender for the male suicide epidemic. Here's how they do it. The first way feminists will blame the male gender for male suicide is the most blatantly vile and obvious form of victim blaming, which generally comes up in heated arguments with feminists about male issues. If you've argued with feminists recently about male suicide, you've probably come across this. Or if you have simply seen footage of Big Red, for example, berating men in Toronto, you'll know what I am talking about. The basic argument, in a sentence, is this. Patriarchy hurts men too. Man, baby! This type of person basically isn't even pretending to care about male problems, so it's at least nice that they are upfront about that. This is victim blaming because the operative notion that the feminist is attempting to argue is that the world is set up by men to privilege all other men, which is the unified patriarchy that we all supposedly live under, and this patriarchy controls the whole world, and since the whole world is not perfect, men suffer under this system as well because, according to this feminist, this shitty patriarchal system was a bad idea that men came up with themselves, and therefore, even though men supposedly set up society to benefit them, it didn't really work all that well because men suck and they set up the world to be shitty, even for them. So basically, the argument she is attempting to make is that men commit suicide because men did a shitty job setting up the world to make themselves happy, which is pure lunacy. But even if it wasn't, the feminist is kind of blaming men who commit suicide for being male and not being happy enough with the world supposedly catered to male comfort, which we don't actually live in a world that's catered to male comfort. Usually things are actually catered a bit more to female comfort, but it doesn't matter because this feminist saying such things is a callous victim blamer. The second way that feminists blame males for their own suicides and their suicidal thoughts is by saying that there is something defective with men where they are supposedly not showing their emotions enough, and if men and boys only allowed themselves to cry a bit more often, everything would be fine. Now, I'm not saying that men and boys shouldn't seek mental health care more often if something is going wrong, because they should. But often, the only help they get is basically people telling them to cry more often. At least, certainly, if they ask feminists for help. Watch the feminist documentary, The Mask You Live In, which is supposedly about male issues, if you want to know more about that line of thinking. The only advice they offer is for men and boys to show their emotions more often, and supposedly all male issues will be solved. This one is super irritating because while some feminists sincerely believe that men are basically just defective women who don't know how to feel their emotions and would be happier if they did, many feminists routinely mock men for their emotions at the same time, especially if their feelings go against the feminist narrative, like what happens when men express concern over male suicide, like I already described before. More so, It just pisses me off that feminists act like all male problems would be solved if men just started crying more often. From my personal understanding as a male of other males, it's not so much that men won't allow themselves to cry that is the problem. The problem is simply that a lot of men are unhappy and don't know how to improve their lives. Males don't want to cry more. They want to not be frustrated, hopeless, and sad. So when you tell them to cry more as if it will solve everything, and it doesn't, what the hell are you doing besides victim blaming? You're telling males that it's not their feelings or the cause of their feelings that matter, but rather it's something about them as a person that is defective in regards to processing their feelings. It's really bad behavior, if you think about it, to tell men that it's their fault that they aren't working out their sadness in their own head because, I guess, according to you, there's nothing to be sad about. Fuck you. The third and final way that I'm going to talk about that feminists victim blame men for male suicide is that feminists love to claim that although we know that 78% of suicides in the West are male, that doesn't really count according to feminists because supposedly, according to some magical statistical data that I've yet to actually see, women and girls attempt suicide more often and yet fail. And it supposedly evens out if you take into account failed female suicide attempts. Now, this is already a stupid argument, even if it were true. And it's also not even true because men and boys are far less likely to report failed suicide attempts because male mental health treatment is garbage, and half the time people are just obsessed with encouraging men and boys to cry all the time, like I mentioned before. Regardless, when feminists brush off the very real statistic of male suicide composing around 78% of suicides in the West, they usually say that the only reason that males are successful in killing themselves is because males use more violent methods of killing themselves. And this is where it becomes victim blaming. Basically, what I am getting from this argument seems to be that the feminists are saying that the reason men and boys commit suicide and are successful is because they are icky and gross and full of toxic masculinity, and they are violent to everybody because they're male, including themselves. They're even more violent to themselves than women are, and so the reason men and boys succeed in killing themselves more than women is because toxic masculinity. That's really kind of what it sounds like, doesn't it? Instead of having compassion about why exactly men and boys might be killing themselves and killing themselves in a way that makes sure they actually do really end up dead when they do it, feminists just blame males for choosing to be toxically masculine and using a firearm or hanging to kill themselves instead of the nice and wholesome feminine methods of swallowing a bunch of non-lethal pills like the good girls do. That's all I have to say for this evening. Drop me a comment, help me out on Patreon if you want more videos like this, where I just talk about ideas, social trends, and arguments in a general sense, and stay tuned.